All right, everyone. It's been a big year in crypto accounting. We have a great panel here to talk about 2024 and what happened in 2023, and looking forward too. So a bit of background before I let everyone introduce themselves. 2023 was really a groundbreaking year for accounting. The FASB came through at lightning speed as well with a brand new accounting standard, and that's the accounting standard at reporting at fair value. Also adding a lot more transparencies through required disclosures as well. They heard the industry screaming that they needed this, that they wanted this, and they acted fast. So we're here to talk about that. We're here to talk about some other accounting initiatives that are being talked about right now, and more importantly, I think getting into some of the issues that we see. So hopefully we could help everyone else uncover, maybe what not to do or the errors, because we learn from our mistakes. So I'll let everyone introduce themselves, but I'm Jeff Rundlet, Head of Accounting Strategy at Cryptio.
Great. Oh, good. It's working. Hello, everyone. I'm David Byrd. I'm a partner at EY. I'm our global leader of blockchain assurance. So that covers a lot of ground, inclusive of audits, audit readiness, right? We were just chatting earlier about that, and a number of other sort of services. So great to be here. Thanks, Jeff.
Nick Cappiello, Supervising Project Manager, Financial Accounting Standards Board, and I was the project lead on the crypto project.
Jason Bowie, sitting in the Accounting Advisory Service at KPMG. We do mostly all the financial reporting, technical accounting, covers the digital asset industry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Scicchitano. I'm an audit principal at Wolf & Company. A little bit about Wolf. We're a regional CPA firm based in Boston, about 400 employees, and focus on audit, tax, and risk management services. I sit on the audit side, specifically within the crypto and blockchain group. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, guys. So high level, I just want to go down the line. What has been your take, yours personally and from your clients or companies, with this new fair value and disclosure requirements? Jason, you could start. Sorry.
I can start.
David.
It's okay.
Why don't we go down the line?
Okay.
All right. Yeah, don't skip the line, Jason. Come on. Yeah, there you go. Well, this is, I'm sure, topics that many of you will echo, so I'll try not to steal all the thunder. But for the update, a lot of it is somewhat familiar with companies, right? Operationally, they've been tracking these assets for a while now, but I would say sort of three things that I've seen, at least. One is that, don't forget, it's not just reporting certain assets at fair value, right? It also includes a number of disclosures, right? So you got to be thoughtful about that. The role and all the rest that happens to be there, figuring out what's significant, all that. So that's one. Operationally, if you are grabbing all the fair value of these things, of course, we had a question in the last panel about cost basis. You need to have the data for that, right? Do you have the systems? Do you have the tools and others that might be available to help you do that? So it's great that you now can report that, but can you, right? So having that data available. And then just sort of making sure that you're actually reporting the right fair value. I mean, it's super easy to grab an aggregated, average from one of these sites that have a lot of assets. But, at least if we're talking US GAAP, then, that's not GAAP. GAAP is identifying a principal market, and it's and often a token-by-token analysis. So that's a little effort. So, Jeff, those are a few things that I've seen. But, Nick?
Really well written, right? You wanted to add that? Okay. That's all I have to say.
The standard came out now for about 10 months, and I think we've been talking to a lot of companies, some of them in the room today. And I think if I reflect what has transpiring in the last 10 months, I would say two things that I see the most is one is kind of what David said around determination of fair value, and the other one is what's in and what's out of scope of the ASU. I mean, it seems kind of straightforward when you look at the criteria. And obviously, we're not going to get all technical on this panel, but I think there's a lot of discussion around, some of the criteria within the guidance of, is it in scope or is it based on some of the language that provide in the FASB guide, around enforceability, right? And also, if you are an issuer and a related party of the issuer, you deem to be out of scope. So how does that being evaluated? So I would say the in scope and out of scope is one thing that we've been focusing a lot for our clients. And two is, David said, is determination of fair value. It seems straightforward. I mean, ASC 820 or the old 157 has been around for 20 years now, so there's a lot of practical knowledge that you can analogize to. But when it comes to crypto, I think it's still somewhat challenging, especially with a less liquid crypto. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that as well, but that's kind of my reflection of the last 10 months.
Yeah, not a whole lot to add based on those responses, but I think this is something that we've all been asking for a while. I know last year the panel was sitting up in here talking about how fair value would be so much more appropriate, and everyone was pushing for fair value. So I think everyone's fairly happy with it. It's certainly less costly and time-consuming than the previous impairment model was. I don't think anybody last year was saying, oh yes, we really enjoy marking all of our investments down to the lowest cost for the year. So it certainly makes it a little bit easier from that side of things. But as Jason mentioned, just making sure that the in-scope versus out-of-scope, what are we doing with wrap tokens? What are we doing with NFTs and those other assets that are not specifically described within the standard?
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies, like you all said, it's really nothing new. A lot of them were doing two types of reporting. They were reporting at fair value and cost, not fair value for their financial reporting, but their investors, their board, they didn't care about the cost or the current accounting. So they were doing accounting twice, and it was taking a lot of time and effort. So, and it's helping just streamline their efforts and make things obviously much more transparent in the financials. So moving over to fair value, it could be a process and creating these asset roll forward, significant asset reports. I want to bring this to Jason and David, who are helping a lot of companies through thinking about how they transition. I guess two sides of the question. What are you recommending as you make this cumulative effective adjustment? What are you recommending as they make these adjustments and going forward? And more importantly, what type of mistakes have you seen companies make, or what type of advice have you been giving where companies are maybe missing aspects of what they need to do?
Why don't you go first, Jason?
Sure, I can go. So we talked a little bit about the fair value measurement, and I think when it comes to the adoption, you guys have seen a few companies that was very eager to early adopt, right? I mean, you see public miners, some of them have disclosed their early adoption. You see a few exchanges out there also have early adopted as well, and you look at those disclosure, I think for the most part, it's fairly straightforward how they have disclosed it. I mean, in terms of determining the fair value for the more popular digital assets. What we have seen lately is when companies start thinking about the mandatory adoption, which is 1/1/25, and you see companies coming out and kind of trying to figure out what is the principal market, kind of what David alluded to earlier, the determination of the principal market and how you come up with the fair value, especially for those companies that hold a substantial large volume of digital asset and in relation to the daily trading volume of that crypto, and should there be some sort of block discount or some sort of adjustment to the fair value that you see on the exchange or on the trade price. So a lot of that, in our mind, is you can look to ASC 820 because all of that has been addressed and dealt with in the traditional equity and fixed income markets. So I think none of that would be relatively surprising and new to ASC 820. So I think kind of working through the guidance, and address those items. And another thing we see a lot is around disclosure and, determining the leveling, right? Is it level 1, is it level 2? Or is it something that you really have to go through a bit more adjustment to get to something that you cannot obtain from the traded price? So we see some of those kind of coming through at the moment. And another thing, from a fair value perspective is when you deal with very, very illiquid tokens, right? That's where a lot of significant level of adjustment will come into play to, again, go to the traded price and determine whether you need to make any sort of adjustment to that, if it's appropriate. So.
Well, that's great. Maybe like Nick, I might say that kind of covers it sufficiently. And this might be stealing some thunder from subsequent questions, but just to sneak it in, yes, some of the challenges in making the adjustment is companies say, great, I can fair value everything. Well, hold on. Not everything was included in that update because it wasn't the same, right? So we might talk about stablecoins later. We might talk about tokens that are wrapped in other forms, right? We might talk about NFTs. These things all have very different fact patterns, and so we understand why you couldn't just all get the same treatment. So that's been one, making sure the companies understand what really is affected by the update. And then the other is, sometimes it can be tough to get the fair value for these very thinly traded. You're like, oh, wow, okay, I got to mark all this stuff, huh? That's when your valuation specialist can come in, right? You don't have one on hand. Because when you said the levels, 1, 2, and 3, that sort of triggered me to think, yeah, that's true. It might be super thin, and you might want to engage a specialist just to see if you're really marking this as it should. You might want to be super conservative. Oh, I'll just mark it as low as I can. But that's not the goal either. The goal is the fair value. You don't want to necessarily shoot under that. So there's just a few things that we've seen.
Yeah, and it's a good transition into the next question, Nick. It was a very narrow scope. That was on purpose, so you guys could push through something in a timely manner and not take too long. So talk to us. What are the conversations at the FASB around NFTs, around wrap tokens, anything that's out of scope?
Sure. The scope was very purposeful. It did leave out certain assets. Our view at the time was, one, those assets likely, when you look at the substance of them, have accounting that's already in place based on other guidance. So if you have a contract, there's guidance around many different contracts. Just because they're digitized doesn't mean the accounting should be different. Financial assets. Some might argue about certain financial assets and the accounting for those assets, but there is established guidance for those. Just because you digitize something doesn't mean the accounting should change. So the scope was purposeful. It did allow us to get the work done rather quickly. As far as what we are thinking about right now with regards to NFTs, wrap tokens, et cetera, what are we thinking about right now? Not a lot. You can look at our agenda. Our agenda is on FASB.org. There's nothing on our technical nor on our research agenda concerning crypto assets at this time. However, we do have an invitation to comment coming relatively soon in the fourth quarter about the future of the FASB's agenda. One of the current state of things right now for us, we do have conversations often with industry, the audit practice, international standard setters. We don't hear a lot right now with regards to our standards about the need for additional standard setting. There's a few issues that are beginning to bubble up. And I think when you start to talk about an invitation to comment, that sort of conversation begins to happen. So that's one mechanism that if there is something that the FASB doesn't know about that needs to be addressed, that's one mechanism in which to reach in, is reply to our invitation to comment on the future of our agenda. The second way, and this is always available, is you can always write our technical director for an agenda request. There were 6 agenda requests for crypto assets to be dealt with and to be brought to fair value over several years, which led to our project. So it's our due process to address all agenda requests. It's going to be our due process to address the issues that come through the invitation to comment. Rob was kind enough to mention it in the previous, we do listen. It'd probably surprise all of you if you spend some time at the FASB to see how we do read every letter. We do assign staff to really think about these things and really make financial reporting improved. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Thank you. And with the not lack of guidance, but missing or guidance that still needs to be filled in, what type of advice, and this goes to everyone, are we giving clients around wrap tokens, for example? I've heard, there's ways around it to report them at fair value. Some companies are deciding to report it at cost, but what kind of recommendations are we giving our clients?
Before that, Jeff, is it okay if I have a quick follow-up with...
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I just want to make this... It's so exciting to have you here with all of us. Don't worry.
Said no one to a FASB person ever.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a new day. So no, not to put you on the spot, but just to sort of confirm, the historic effort to get this update that we do have, when you consider the role of the FASB, it's not just only for crypto, it's for the entire ecosystem. And is that the advice is the opportunity to comment on what should be on the agenda, like you said, is coming up. So if there's something that you desperately want guidance on or some clarification or maybe a similar update on, like that is the nearest opportunity to get it on the agenda. And you make public the sort of considerations, right? But you let me know, I'm truly not trying to put words in your mouth, around what are the considerations that the FASB thinks about when putting something on the agenda? Because there's a lot of stuff, right? So one is there a sufficiently pervasive need? You know, are we really hearing the entire course that, hey, like for Locom on crypto, right? This is just not good. And everyone said the same thing. And so that sort of checked that box. But then also, you know, the FASB needs to assess, well, look, are there sufficient benefits that we're really going to see that overcome the costs of making this update, right? That's one thing too. And then, you know, several other sort of considerations like that. What's the
third one is whether you can actually scope the issue appropriately, and are there feasible and cost beneficial solutions? So sometimes you could say there's something we could do, but it's not really feasible, like when you really look at what it would take. But it's the scopability that's the issue, which in this case, when we did crypto, there were a number of scopability considerations that I brought to the board and said we could do this a number of ways. None of which at the end of the day, after continuing to talk to folks like yourselves, would have been good ideas, right? So again, it's kind of like this iterative nature of how we put things on the agenda, but scopability was your third one. And pervasive need is huge, right? This isn't Santa Claus's wish list. One of you doesn't say, I'd really like this, and it falls on your doorstep. We have to establish that there really is a need, that issue is not just enough of folks, but that the effect of it would be big enough.
I think you mentioned that there was something upwards of like 500 different individual requests, right? And that's where you guys finally said, okay, this is a real issue.
Well, yeah, I think we knew it was, well, I would say this. We had agenda requests, and I brought it to the board in 2020 and to see if they wanted to put it on the agenda. And that was after 3 requests. And the board said no at that time. We had 3 more requests, and then we had an invitation to comment. As part of the invitation to comment, we had a high-profile crypto individual tweet to his followers to tell the FASB what to do. And then came the 480-plus requests. Yes.
Yes.
Just had a quick question. Are you referring, when you keep saying the update, we're talking about ASU 2023 08, right?
That's right.
Nobody ever said that, so I just wanted to make sure that was what we were talking about. Okay.
That's right. So back to assets out of scope. How should we recommend that these are reported, or what are the different ways that we're recommending? I've heard, you know, things of reporting them as embedded derivatives. So you could report them at fair value. Like there's a lot of ways around this. As long as you make the case, I think you can report at fair value or simply report at cost. But what are we recommending?
I mean, we going back to the in-scope and out-of-scope discussion here a little bit on this. I mean, as Nick alluded to, and wrap token was purposely left out of the ASU. And if you take wrap Bitcoins and is the most common wrap tokens out there in the market, I think there's a lot of analysis has been done in the industry, whether that is in scope and out of scope. And as I alluded to earlier, I think the most judgmental aspect of that determination is whether the holder of that wrap token has the enforceable right or the claims on the underlying, you know, asset of the wrap token. It's a legal assessment at the end of the day, right? It's something that you would have to work with your counsel to look at your T&Cs of the wrap token and to understand what it is that you are allowed to exercise your redemption right, essentially, when it comes down to it. So it's super subjective analysis, and I think same goes with stablecoins. Stablecoin is another, I would say, very judgmental area. Is it a financial asset to start with, right? That's where we all start with, is it a financial asset? And then you move on from that. If it's not a financial asset, then you evaluate under the ASU and you get to the same exact, subjectivity analysis of the enforceability right of that stablecoin. So I mean, the only thing I would suggest to that is work with your counsel, because it is a very legal determination at the end of the day of whether that T&C that you have allow you to have the right to redeem that underlying asset.
Yeah, I don't know if you're seeing anything different, Marissa, but I'm so glad you brought up the stablecoin case when you were discussing the wrap token, because they vary, right? So you just can't have a treatment like, okay, well, what's the kind of treatment for stablecoins? What's the treatment for all wrap tokens? Well, the facts and circumstances really do vary from each one. And so if one says, oh, well, we reserve the right to, think about it before providing you with a redemption of the underlying, okay, well, that doesn't look like it's very straightforwardly redeemable one-to-one for that other asset. And so, yeah, these are absolutely considerations. Certainly a lot of these, when you think about, contractually or otherwise, what are we entitled to? That's that legal analysis that your accounting person is not going to be able to give you a loan. But then once that fact pattern, the economics of that asset are determined, then you can look to the other frameworks about, okay, this thing might still be an intangible. I can't stick it anywhere else. Or maybe it is a financial asset. So again, it's so frustrating to say it depends, but it truly does.
Thank you. And so Marissa, one of the requirements is around reporting significant assets. What are we recommending to different companies? What does this mean? How do you select what a significant asset is, and what do you report, what do you not report?
Yeah, it's funny. David just mentioned it depends, because that's another area where there's really no bright line threshold to say you need to report anything over 10% of your total assets as an individually significant asset, or 5% of your individual assets. I've seen it done many different ways. Some companies report their top 10 assets, their top 5 assets, their top 25 assets, maybe all of their assets. So it's very subjective, and it really depends on the specific users of the financial statement. So if you are a publicly traded company, many users of your financial statements, lots of people looking at that data, you may need to have some more developed and robust disclosures surrounding significant assets. Whereas if you are a closely held company, 3 or 4 people, a couple founders, maybe 1 or 2 investors, fewer people are looking at your financial statements, and there's fewer decision makers potentially. So your disclosures may not need to be as robust as a larger public company. So I would recommend just thinking about who's really using your financial statements, who are the decision makers. If somebody's a decision maker and looking at your financial statements and you're only disclosing any assets greater than 10% of your total assets, or any crypto assets greater than 10% of your crypto assets, is their decision for investing in your company going to be different if you disclose anything over 5%? So just thinking about the different nuances of who's looking at these financial statements and what is going to be valuable to them. And then I would just stress remaining consistent year over year. If you pick a policy, stick to it. You don't want to be flip-flopping back and forth, because then people like us, the auditors, will be questioning why you changed your policy and your accounting disclosures. So try to pick something that makes sense for your users and is consistent.
Thank you. Yeah. And we touched on this before. It's a liquid assets, and having to price them. So how are we recommending the best practice in pricing assets that might not even have actual market to them? Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I can take this one. I mean, I alluded to earlier, I mean, the good thing is ASC 820 has been around for a very, very long time. The equity market has a lot of good examples around pink sheet, right? I mean, take pink sheet is a good example for this. Just because a particular stock is not highly traded in the market, it does not necessarily mean that you can look to the traded price and think about that as a proxy to fair value. So if you analogize to that, kind of classic example on a pink sheet for equity market, you can think about that for the digital asset environment as well. I mean, we are working with a few companies where the token itself may not be, popular like Bitcoin, ETH, but I think if there's sufficient volume that you see, and those volume don't fluctuate in a daily basis. There's a lot of data you can look to make the determination on whether the market is active, right? So that's kind of the first determination is, do you have an active market for that particular token? And there's a lot of guidance in ASC 820 that can help you with that determination. And then once you make determination there is an active market, and then you kind of then look at the volume being traded for that particular token, and you make determination whether there has been any significant decrease in that volume trading. And again, there's a lot of guidance in ASC 820 also that you can look to for that particular analysis. And then if you make any sort of assessment of, because that token that I'm trying to fair value don't have enough, daily volume, or the volume is so insubstantial, what do I need to do in terms of making any sort of adjustments to that? I think, again, that's a very, very subjective analysis as well. But I mean, we have worked with companies on this area for a bit of time, the last few months, and there hasn't been a lot of cases where it would make any sort of adjustment yet that we haven't seen so far.
That's a pretty terrific response. I will only just add and if you're having trouble getting your head around that, like I mentioned earlier, you can engage valuation specialists. Now, it's not like you could just go hire them and they give you some number. You're like, great, I'm done. Because you as management do need to understand what model or is being used to try to get to this value. And of course, your auditor, when they come in, they're going to need to get their head around this. So it takes the whole group working together. But Jason, I think that was a great walkthrough of some analogies you could use.
Marissa, companies are doing something brand new, so they need to mitigate risks in all these new processes. What are you recommending to companies in building different controls out to make sure that they don't miss any aspect of sound financial reporting through the fair value reporting?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Internal controls is probably the most exciting topic of the whole discussion today. So I'll
I think so.
try to give a good answer here. So for internal controls, I think it's really important to think about where you're headed in your future. Even though you're a small company now, are you planning to IPO? Are you planning to take an investment in? Are you planning to get audited financial statements? If you are, probably makes sense to start building out your internal control matrix now, so that by the time that you get to that position and people are looking at your internal controls, you have a good understanding and some good governance procedures in place. When it comes to some specific internal controls that I would recommend implementing, oftentimes I see system controls, which are always a good thing. Anything you can automate and reduce human error is always a positive. Systems can create efficiencies and be more accurate with their reporting. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is if you are relying on a system, you want to make sure that there is a SOC report for that system and somebody's looking at the data integrity controls and anything that goes into that data that you're relying on as part of your internal control procedures. Another area that I'd recommend implementing internal controls in would just be overall reconciliations. If you hold crypto assets, preparing a reconciliation from your internal systems to third-party blockchain data, third-party pricing data, because when your auditors come in, they're going to be looking at that comparison as well and trying to reconcile that information. So the better you're able to have a process in place to catch any issues before your auditors come in, the better. You want to be in a position where you understand if there's any variances or any concerns within your financial reporting and why that doesn't agree to kind of the external source of truth. And then just one other area in terms of internal controls, which may be an unpopular opinion, but I would try to keep the documentation outside of Slack. A lot of times I see companies documenting their internal controls as, I shared this document with my colleague over Slack, and it's hard for third parties to take a look and get comfortable over that control is actually occurring. So once you do get these controls in place, you want to make sure to document them, provide signatures and approval process so that it can be audited when it's time to be. And just kind of in terms of specific additional internal controls as it relates to the new fair value standard, I would say another key area is just given the dynamic changes within the crypto industry and digital assets can go from being level 3 security to being traded more frequently on a public market. So keeping in mind when those levels that we talked about earlier, when the levels change in the fair value analysis and how those can be disclosed appropriately. So I think having a control there to make sure you can catch any changes is important. And overall, just documentation, getting your policies and procedures documented early on in the process can just make that a lot more streamlined later on.
And talk us through the control matrix that you're talking about. For anyone that's not aware with that, like how should they think about that? How should they build that?
Yeah, so I think first you would go through and identify what risks are applicable to your company. Where do you see that there could potentially be any fraud occurring, any errors occurring, map those out, and then add some controls in place to be able to mitigate those risks. Are you concerned with a loss of your private key? How do you mitigate that risk? Where are you going to maintain those private keys? Who's going to have access to those? So mapping out your risks and then assigning control processes to those.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay.
Another thorough response. I think she covered
Yes,
it.
very thorough. So, Nick, one thing we've seen is that although we're reporting at fair value, the world is not. The IASB has not caught on, and they haven't been sold on this. I know that the FASB meets with them. Hoping that you could give some insights into some meetings that you've had, discussions that they've had, and maybe one day if we could kind of meet in the middle and have one accounting standard globally that's at least somewhat similar.
Sure. I think I haven't said anything controversial up to this point, and I did not do my disclaimer, so my opinions are my own, not those of the board. So first off, as far as the mechanisms that we have to engage with international standard setters, although we might seem like we're pretty ahead of the game, we weren't the first. I think the Japanese were probably the first set of standard setters that did some really good work in this space and went to a place of fair value for a certain subset of these assets. Their standard setting happens as a matter of law, actually, so that's why they move a little quicker than we do. We do have the dialogue. I think that they have a very similar set of considerations to our set of considerations as to whether something gets on their agenda. And I think the last time they met and discussed, I certainly don't speak for my board. I certainly don't speak for theirs. But I believe the last time that they spoke about this in public, the issue was that of pervasiveness. I don't think that at that time that board thought that they passed that hurdle from an international perspective. That said, when we do speak to some of the other international standard setters, they're pleased that we've done what we've done. They think it adds to the case of pervasiveness, at least for certain portions of the world. I know we continue to meet with the Korean Standards Board, the Canadian Standards Board, the IFAS, which is an aggregation of a number of international standard setters that get together. We all meet and discuss so many issues. That's the other thing that's something that everybody should appreciate. Certainly crypto is an issue. There are so many other financial reporting issues. So I think in the mosaic of all of those things, it's sometimes hard to get all of the issues that need to be addressed.
Fair enough. So that wraps it up with a lot of the FASB talk. I think we have about 5-10 more minutes. I wanted to touch on SAB 121. Big topic. Open it up to the floor with what are your general thoughts? Where do you think this needs to go, and how do you think it's impacting the industry?
Nick, going to get you on the record. No, just joking. Yeah. Well, I mean, I can just sort of state the obvious, right? Is that I think many of us have been pleased with the very recent developments of. Maybe you're not, of specific accommodation for certain types of entities with respect to the SAB. And just to clarify for everyone, just to make sure we all know what we're talking about here, I appreciate the earlier clarifying question, right, is that the SAB 121 was an update from the SEC that affected how, public companies would report their obligations to customers around digital assets. And it had the consequence that for some of those companies, for instance, public banks, right? They now, if they did hold significant sums of these, that would trigger these capital requirements, which again, I'm just sort of stating very generally, that made it very difficult for them to operate in the space. And it's been interesting, right? Because our ecosystem has initially grown from private companies, crypto native companies and so on. And then we've seen an increasing number of traditional large or public companies come into space, including banks. And so this was clearly a hurdle. So the fact that we, very recently did see the SEC share that some relief would be provided for very specific fact patterns, right? This is not to broadcast broadly, according to what they said. That was nice to see. There's obviously larger efforts about whether or not the SAB should remain around at all that I absolutely won't comment on. But yeah, I would say that's sort of what we've seen. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, and I would echo what you just said. I think this came out, 3 weeks ago, back in September, during the AICPA banking, and they gave example of 3 different, cases where the SEC did not object to the exclusion of SAB 121. I think the one with the financial institution was the very welcoming news, like you said, David. I think a lot of hope was being considered now in terms of other want to follow the same suit, I would say. And I think what David just said is right. I think it's very facts and circumstances based, just like anything else with SAB 121. So I think a lot of other large financial institutions will try to see if they can apply similar scope exception to that. And we have worked with a lot of the broker dealer side as well. So broker dealer is another sector that has been impacted quite significantly due to the SAB 121, and I think one of the examples that was provided in the AICPA banking was also very welcome to see that one of the introducing broker dealer was able to get the exemption. So I think it's a positive side that more companies will try to to go through the same process with the SEC to get scoped out.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you asked us a few weeks or a month ago, it would have been a lot of negative talk about SAB 121, but it seems like there's been some positive developments and relief happening, so that's a good thing to see.
Well, thank you, everyone. Could open it up to the floor for any accounting questions.
Hello, hi. This is Kitchen from VanEck. I just got questions in regards to what are your views on Bitcoin inscriptions, like in terms of fair values and tracking?
I'll just be honest, that's not a question that has come to us yet. So I'm glad to hear it for the first time. But I mean, if there's a little bit more, I don't just to pass over the question very quickly. Is there some nature of Bitcoin inscriptions in particular that you think has sort of resisted being able to be scoped in certain ways?
Yeah. So basically, like Bitcoin, like there's certain satoshis like because of the new development surrounding the Bitcoin protocol, they can inscribe like certain marks into them, into the satoshis. So in a way that translates to like potentially seeing that those as NFTs. It's just a new development that's been kind of going on in the last like couple of months.
Thank you for the reminder. I mean, a lot of these have received a lot of news, right? And certainly I am excited about, whatever happens in the larger Bitcoin ecosystem. I mean, when you're describing that sort of case, it just reminds us of the incredible diversity of types of tokens, assets, protocols, you name it, out there. And so to the extent you add what appears to be terms and conditions or other rights perhaps to these assets that take it away from, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum or so on, then yeah, it looks like the accounting update that we received is less likely to be applicable there, right? So that's, I suppose, all I can say for now. But that doesn't mean, well, I guess good luck. No, that means you have an entire history and framework of fair value and other types of accounting standards that you can look to analogize So I wish I could speak to it more specifically, but that's kind of where we are.
Hi, I'm Casper from Technos Associates. We're a valuation specialist with a focus on digital assets. I had a question around the token issuers. So token issuers right now are out of scope, where obviously a big portion of their balance sheet is the native token. So I was wondering from the panel if you guys have any thoughts on what desired guidance around fair value would look like for these entities.
Yeah, I mean, we are working with a few of them right now as we speak about token issuer, and to your point, it is outside of scope of the ASU, so it is reverted back to the intangible asset model. There hasn't been any. I mean, Nick would love to hear your perspective on this, but I think that that's where we are. Cost less impairment model for those token issuer.
So intangibles are funny, right? Because they lack physical substance, and that's where the similarities stop. But there is a little bit of history about internally generated intangible assets. And we have broader conversations about that happening at the FASB almost all the time. So I think that's a complicating factor to addressing that particular issue. That said, we certainly heard during our project that what about those? And we said, well, what about those is we're going to keep them out of scope or else we'll never get this thing done. I think it's a complicated accounting issue, but we're not the easy accounting issue standards board.
Right.
But it's currently not on our agenda. But if we heard enough about it needing to be addressed, and all the criteria we talked about, but as of right now, it kind of just gets bumped out of 350/60.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that we don't necessarily want to support the printing of magic internet money for every single entity that comes up with a token. But, in certain cases, when you're talking about projects like Aave or whatever, they have substantial volume, obviously. And it seems, it's always awkward for me when I have to say, well, you guys are not included. So.
Agreed. Scoping that scopability piece would be tricky for the exact issue that you raised. But again, just because it's tricky doesn't mean it may not be worth doing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.